Hello, we are here with Dr. Crystal Grant, who is going to join us for our featured interview on our Big Impact Day because Dr. Crystal has been making a huge impact in our community, so we wanted to showcase that today. So, Dr. Crystal Grant, could you tell us a couple of things about yourself? Let's start with where you're from and where you went to school.
Yeah, and also I'm really happy to be here. Thank you for hosting me. So I'm from Queens, New York originally, and I went to like Cornell for my undergrad. I was a bio major, and kind of started doing genetics research there in my sophomore year, and really enjoyed it. And then went to Emory University after that to pursue my PhD in genetics and molecular biology.
That's wonderful. So during your, process of like becoming a geneticist, who were some of your role models?
Oh, that's a great question. I'm really, and I wish I had a better answer, but I don't feel like I have a lot of role models. I guess it's like my advisor during my PhD, obviously, was a great role model. Okay, I do have some, I guess. And my undergraduate advisor was really great. Dr. Booker was like one of very few the like Black professors in the like sciences and biology at Cornell, and I definitely looked up to him, and he was very important in encouraging me to pursue the path of a PhD because I, of course, like I was like, okay, I watched a lot of Grey's Anatomy, so naturally I'll be a neurosurgeon. And it took a while in my first like semester of college to be like, I don't think I actually would enjoy that at all. And talking to him, he kind of explained what a PhD was and what the process of research was, and it just sounded way more interesting. So yeah, I think I guess I think he was a role model without me really realizing it, kind of slowly guiding me towards a PhD. But I'm really grateful that he did.
Yeah. I think it's important for us to talk about role models in like the Black science community because there's so few of us. And, I was talking to some undergrads a couple days ago and they were thinking about like, I look up to all of these people who are older than me and with like not just Black in genetics, but like Black in neuro and Black in cardio and like all of these things on Twitter, there's a lot more visibility. And so I think that, is making a significant impact on the undergrads who are coming up behind us.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah, definitely agree.
yeah. So, okay, so you are a current fellow at the ACLU, and we were hoping to hear some more details about that. So, how did you even come to the ACLU in the first place?
Yeah, it's a great question. It is purely by chance. I was so before this role, I was also doing a fellowship called Tech Congress in where I was working in the Senate, where their goal is kind of just to get more technologists and put them like on the hill to try to. I think they call it like raise the tech IQ of Congress, and I love that opportunity, but it was only for a year. And I was maybe a little more than maybe like 2/3 of the way through. I was trying to decide, okay, what am I going to do next? And a friend was listening to some podcast, and it mentioned like doing kind of tech policy and advocacy work at the ACLU. And she just Googled if they had jobs because she knew I was looking. And she found this tech fellowship and sent it to me, and it sounded amazing. And yeah, I applied. I was really fortunate to get it. So yeah, I wish I could give the advice to go to this particular job board, but I think maybe it's just like let people know that you're looking for opportunities, and so they know to kind of keep an eye out, an ear out for anything that sounds like it might be a good fit for you. So yeah, it was just kind of by luck. But through interviewing, learned that they had previously had a geneticist in this fellowship role like years before when I was in college, and that she had been really instrumental in taking the case to the Supreme Court about patenting the BRCA gene and how patenting like genes should not be legal, and like was very she was really instrumental in kind of educating the litigators so that they could give the best art, like put their best foot forward in arguing to the Supreme Court why you can't patent these naturally occurring things in biology. So yeah, I definitely felt like I was coming in with huge shoes to fill. Since they're like, well, last time we had a geneticist, she had this like huge impact on the Supreme Court. Yeah, I was really happy that they were excited to have another like geneticist kind of come in and continue work around like privacy or like genetic privacy and surveillance. And yeah, it's been a really great experience so far.
So there were so many points you brought up that I want to dig into a little bit more. So I guess chronologically, let's start with where you were at before this. So you worked as a legislative fellow in the office of Elizabeth Warren. Is there anything that you can tell us about that experience? Do you have any like favorite policies that you worked on?
Yeah, I loved that time, and I think it's like a lot of people are interested in science policy and try, and it's so funny because I think a lot of us and there's several programs. There's Tech Congress, which I did. There's AAAS, and I think a lot of us kind of go in with this imposter syndrome of like, oh, I'm a scientist. What do I know about policy? And I actually talked to a bunch of alums of the Warren office recently and was saying like, oh, maybe I should have gotten a master's in policy after my PhD or something. And they're saying that actually it's much more beneficial and helpful for you to be a subject matter expert who then goes and I guess talks to the people who really know how to best influence policy and tell them kind of like using your expertise, this is what the policy should say, this is what we need to emphasize, than to kind of do it the other way around. So I definitely went into that role with imposter syndrome of like, oh, I'm just a geneticist. What am I doing here, writing laws and like doing oversight investigations? But you slowly realize that you're seeing things in a way, or seeing issues very clearly that need to be rectified, and that you can really clearly state why they're issues. So one that I really liked is I was there in fall of 2020, fall 2020, and this was so it was maybe like 5-6 months into the pandemic, and under the CDC under the Trump administration had this really odd data policy where they were looking at COVID mortality rates, but they weren't correcting for underlying differences in age of like different like demographics. So they were breaking it down by age and by demographics, but not kind of doing this like baseline correction that you would need to do for the fact that those age distributions themselves differ by different like racial and ethnic groups. And so it was just something that like from my like years of statistics and stuff where in reading about it, I was like, oh yeah, that's a huge like that's a huge statistical error. If there were reviewers, they would be like, hey, you need to fix this. Through the Warren office of doing this investigation, realized that the CDC was making this error in their data policies. We were able to send a letter to them, just kind of saying like, hey, this is an error that you need to address. And as a result, they kind of redid the math and did it correctly and updated their numbers. And it showed, unfortunately, that there was a much bigger mortality risk for people of color than they had previously been stating to the public. So yeah, this was there were so many examples like that. Or another project I was really excited to work on that is still getting a lot of attention is racial bias in clinical algorithms, where it's been very cool to see like over the years since like Senator Warren was able to use her voice to talk about that issue, that like we've seen more and more people kind of advocate and like groups made to talk about the need to remove the practice of race norming in clinical algorithms. And same thing because I was doing a lot of algorithm development and looking at like differences and disease risk as part of my PhD. This was something I was already thinking about like racial bias in health algorithms, and so I was able to like bring that knowledge to the senator's work and have her kind of like really be a voice about like why this was a huge issue that needed to be fixed. So yeah, it's just I feel like I think no matter how many times you say don't have imposter syndrome, if you want to make that switch, you always will. But I think it's kind of like once you start working in policy or advocacy, you see like there are just so many things that you as a geneticist can contribute to and can add to and can like really like be able to affect change. So yeah, I really enjoyed that that role.
Yeah, that's absolutely fantastic to hear. And I mean, I'm a little bit surprised. I guess not surprised because everybody has imposter syndrome, but from a third party looking in, you very much seem like you know what you're doing and you belong where you. So,
Thank you.
yeah, but it's, everybody has imposter syndrome. So I guess one question, a follow-up would be how, like, do you have any tips for how to deal with that?
I just feel like oh my gosh, I think I channel that Rihanna quote where someone asked her on an interview, like, what do you do on the days when you don't feel like Rihanna? And she's like, you just fake it till you make it. I just think that is that's kind of what I've been doing. Or I'm very upfront and honest with people like who I'm working with. I'm not saying like, oh, I've got a bit of imposter syndrome, like, so sorry if I'm misstating things. And then I feel like they are often very kind and will point out the ways that or the ways that you maybe see things differently that they do and how that's really valuable. So I think but yeah, that's just me. I'm either just very honest and just let people know that I'm feeling that way, or I will just try to try to pretend like I don't feel that way, and just try to speak up in these like conversations where my expertise and that of the people around me are very different. Yeah.
Yes, I love that. The wise words of Rihanna, she can carry us far.
Yes, yes, you can.
Um, okay, so our next question is kind of like nitpicking one of your most recent articles. So, we read of your article on how police are using genetic material collected during newborn screening to implicate suspects in crimes. And we want to hear so much more about this. So, I guess from like your point of view, sort of what prompted you to work on that issue in particular?
Yeah, I think just when I learned about it, I remember my first semester of my PhD learning about the newborn screening program because I also don't think that I think that a lot of people don't know about it. I think parents obviously after birth are there are a lot of emotions going through their minds, and so they maybe don't notice that, that a sample's been taken from the newborn. I think unfortunately consent isn't something that's really actively like sought for the secondary uses of this blood. I think like the primary use of it as a screening tool is really vital, but the secondary uses like police wanting access to it or other shady things being done with it is there definitely needs to be better consent around it. But yeah, it was learning about what had happened and just thinking about how there was such a huge how first of all the point of taking the blood is not even to get genetic information. It is to look at like levels of amino acids in the blood or like other metabolites, so or like protein. So it's not even meant. It's not supposed to be kind of directly a genetic screen to begin with. Kind of first of all, and so thinking about how this system is being co-opted for a completely different use from like what it was intended for. Also just got me kind of like a little like upset. And yeah, and I just figured like, okay, I am in this very cool role where I get to kind of use my like the platform of ACLU, thankfully, to bring attention to violations of civil liberties, and this is like a glaring one of genetic surveillance. So yeah, I like couldn't help but speak out when I learned about that case, and then in researching it more, realized that the practice, unfortunately, is happening in other states as well. So it's definitely something that I am thinking now about. Yeah, how can we curb this practice? Because like I feel like public trust in public health systems is so vital, and once you start having people not trust it and not want to take part in it, you can really see like increased suffering, especially if there are newborns who have genetic disorders that aren't caught early. So I would really hate to see result of police misuse of this system lead to lack of public trust. So my goal is really just to kind of get attention on the fact that police are doing this, so that we can start thinking about ways to curb the practice.
Yeah, certainly. So, in that article, you mentioned something called investigative genetic genealogy. And we were wondering, is that even legal? And who provides that data to law enforcement? Is it the hospital, the sequencing company? Do you know any of those details?
Yeah. So yeah, the question of is that even legal is something I ask every day in my current role. um, and yeah, I've learned so much about what is and is not legal. Pretty much a lot of things. It's just because technology is moving faster than regulators are comfortable, or in fact, faster than regulators are moving, and faster than regulators are comfortable moving. Um, just we are always on the back foot, unfortunately, where it's kind of like things happen and then we have to like, yeah, then we're very reactionary and like, oh, you can't do that. So for IgG, is it legal? Yeah, there's I don't I think there are I think maybe like Maryland has moved to like try to curb the practice a bit. um, uh, and like like put up boundaries around like when you can and cannot pursue it. And also different states have rules about like being able to kind of like follow around suspects and like grab their DNA and go and sequence it. But for like by and large, is it legal? Well, it's not. It's not written in stone that it's illegal. So because of that, sure, it's legal. Yeah, it's definitely something that like ACLU has been very vocal about thinking that this really violates civil liberties. That at any time, if someone follows you around and can grab some of your what we call like unavoidably shed DNA, so it's like you like throw out a piece of gum in the trash, or you are like drinking from like a cup and throw it out, and police will like go and grab that and sequence your DNA. Um, yeah, and I'm not sure how widespread the practice is, but I know that it's definitely been like it's like an exponential increase since I think 2018 was like the first example of its use. And unfortunately, it's really been aided by these direct to consumer genetic testing companies like 23andMe and Ancestry, where people can choose to opt in to like allow police to access their genetic material as part of performing this IgG. And so, yeah, it's unfortunately a lot of things that if you don't specifically say that they are illegal are kind of fair game. And so in the case of like newborn screening, it's the individual state newborn screening laboratories can be subpoenaed by police to hand over a child sample. And a subpoena is like very easy to get, unfortunately. So it's just way too easy, especially when we start getting into like the medical field. Because I think there's another case also about IUG being performed, and it was like a woman's like I think like part of like uterine tissue that she had tested or sampled was subpoenaed by police to arrest a family member of hers. So just this increasing like twining um, of of police surveillance and our medical system makes me really nervous. And is something that, yeah, in my current role, I'm trying to shed light on, and hopefully that will lead to like policy changes as well.
Yeah, but I mean, you mentioned a couple times that these policies are up to individual states to define. So, I guess what are some of the states that really need more governance and are kind of doing a bad job? And then what are states that are doing well?
Yeah, I don't want to say any states are doing a bad job. There's this really like wonderful, like people are, yeah, well, I think in my article, I link to this amazing law review article by like Professor Natalie Ram, where she has like a map of the different states where she does note that 1 in 3 states have no policies on the book at all about like curbing access by like law enforcement to these blood samples. And if you couple that with the fact that a lot of states keep these samples for like decades or indefinitely, it definitely you can see how those things together are a bit of an issue. But one state that like it has like explicit laws saying like police absolutely cannot touch these samples is Iowa, which yeah, if I could like wave a wand and make that a federal policy, I would. But I know that this is kind of like the individual states are in charge of their own newborn screening program. So it's I'm unsure if that could be a federal policy. If it could, it would be great. But I think that I think Iowa's wording is really clear, and it's also like two sentences where it's just like under no circumstances may police access this data ever. So I think something like that that has to be very explicit is definitely like the best kind of wording to use.
Yeah. So from like a consumer or I guess an individual's perspective, do you think that this issue is something that parents should consider when they're agreeing to newborn screening? You mentioned earlier that, you know, the consenting process, you consent to the primary use of this data, but not to the secondaries. So is this something that we should include in that consent process?
Yeah, I absolutely believe that it like parents should be able to opt out of secondary uses or like there. I'm not sure that there's a consensus in the field yet of like when is the time to destroy these samples that is best for the child. I think I've heard the number of like 5 years thrown around where you can like absolutely rule out the development of any disorders that would have been detectable at the time of birth. But I think that in some states, parents can like write into the like newborn laboratories after a certain time and try to request that these like samples be destroyed. So I think maybe advocacy around those states is a good idea. I definitely would not tell any parent like opt out of this completely, just because I think I forget that I think that it's like 1 in 300 newborns do end up being like positive for some like inborn hereditary errors. So so I and that was something I really thought about in writing the piece and in bringing attention to it because I would absolutely hate to see um, any newborns hurt because parents are concerned about privacy, and that's just kind of the point, is that you shouldn't have to choose between your privacy and the health of your child. So I think a better alternative would be it would be when there's a consensus among the field about the minimum amount of time that you need to keep these samples, both for the health of the child and for maybe like developing these like screening tests for like other disorders. I think that maybe parents could write in and ask that they not be used for anything besides what they're comfortable with, and maybe for some parents they're comfortable with the samples being used for research, but not law enforcement, or maybe some parents, even research, don't want the sample to be used because maybe the child is a minor and can't really consent themselves. But I definitely think it should be that parents should have more of a say in these secondary uses, but that they should be comfortable with the primary use, which is just ensuring the health of their child.
Yeah, certainly. And I think I really like your idea about, you know, maybe we have two steps to the consenting process where you consent to the primary use of the material, and then you have an opt-out for the secondary uses. That seems, you know, kind of built into the system that we already have, whereas writing in, maybe not everybody would do that. So the next question, do you have any other projects that you can tell us about?
Yeah, so something I have coming out soon is I like drafted a white paper about racial bias in like medical technology, like in clinical algorithms. So it's similar work to what I like did in my last role, as well as like medical devices and AI, where it's kind of something that we're generally concerned about in my project in the ACLU is anytime that technology is like automating and embedding any like racial and ethnic bias. And there have been some like high profile examples of this recently, like with finding that pulse oximeters, for example, tend to be less accurate and on people with darker skin, and that there's kind of like this linear relationship, like linear decay between the accuracy and how darkly pigmented people's skin are, or it was for example, like that tool a couple of years ago in 2019 that was found that hospitals were using to predict like the needs of patients, but because it was trained on past historical data, was underestimating the needs of Black patients. So I just wrote about this because I think that not I think I know that the use of AI in medicine is only increasing. And you look at like the tools that have been cleared by the FDA in the last few years that use AI, and I worry that just like the applications of AI in like banking and in hiring, that we're embedding these biases and we maybe don't realize it in these tools. And I worry, I think that we could maybe take a step back and ensure that we're even assessing these tools for possible racial bias before we allow them to hit the market. Because I personally am always so frustrated when I see new tool that was invented shows racial bias, or this new credit card AI approval tool doesn't approve cards for women or approves lower rates. So I just feel like we could be doing a lot more before we let these tools hit the market to ensure that you won't have those really awful headlines in the future, and that has found that the tools have in some way worsened like racism in the US.
So next, I'm going to pivot a little bit and talk about how you think our field is doing generally. So my first question is, what do you think it means to be Black in genetics?
Oh, that's a great one. What it means to be Black in genetics? I think it unfortunately means more work because it means both doing your job and doing the work of kind of fighting against genetics being used as this tool. I feel like it's used as this tool in oppression, unfortunately. Like it's something that people point to, they always have as part of eugenics, of trying to claim that there are innate differences between like racial groups, which has never been true. Now I feel like it's being used by the like anti-trans movement as well, to like point to genetics. And I just think unfortunately it means both doing your job and trying to kind of counter, and just trying to counter the idea that of genetic determinism, or of I guess like any kind of genetic basis of intelligence or other characteristics. Like if I learned anything from my PhD, it's that our genomes are incredibly important, but it's just, I mean, also I studied epigenetics, so of course I'm going to say our environment matters too, but also our environment matters a lot too. And and our like social structures and all of these things have such a larger effect. So I guess I feel like a great example was it was early in the days of COVID, when we found that it was like disproportionately Black and Latino and Native populations who were having the worst outcomes. And I remember a congressman saying like, "Oh, could this be genetic?" And I was really proud of I think it was Dr. Blackstock, who like from the start was like, "No, it is not. It is not some like inborn genetic thing. These are because of societal constructs." And I think being Black in genetics is patiently having that conversation often with people. At least that's been my experience.
Yes, I that has also been a lot of my experience too, so I can relate to that a lot. So how do you feel that aspects of your identity and background have influenced your work and career trajectory?
Oh, that's a great question. Yeah, I think it's just you. I felt like I think it's like I couldn't help but often find myself being the person in the room that was saying, "Okay, but is this working as equally well for everyone?" Um, so as I was writing my dissertation, I went off on this really long tangent because so I studied like epigenetic changes with age, and people had built these models of them to try to like predict age trajectory and trajectory of developing age-related disease for people. And because a lot of like genetic biobanks are mostly people of European descent, I remember one of these tools worked really well on like these specific, really small European populations, and then like just deteriorated the minute you put them in more diverse, more racially ethnic diverse populations. And yeah, and I remember really kind of going off on a tangent and saying how this was a huge issue that we were going to keep coming up against if we didn't really change how we are doing research. Where it's just I feel like the message I was hearing all throughout grad school is like, oh well, we can't work on like certain populations because it'll be like too difficult, and they're like they are already they already have higher levels of diversity, so we need to work on this bottleneck population. And it's like you can only hear that excuse so many times before you just start to kind of hear some people are worth studying and helping and some people aren't. um, and and yeah, I think it made it so that I was always kind of frustrated with the lack of diversity that I was seeing in genetics, and then kind of moving broader into and working in like AI, like policy or tech policy. It's being still the same issue where why are we so okay with such a lack of diversity? I remember even I remember when I was in the Senate, we also put out a letter to the FDA about racial bias in pulse oximeters. So it was before even the most recent study came out that confirmed just how bad it was, where it's like, hey, it looks like there's a potential for racial bias in pulse oximeters. What is the FDA doing? And in learning more about the device approval, I think the rule in the books is you need to test in at least 2 people with dark pigmented skin. And I remember reading that and thinking, what? Like, you need to test on 2 out of how many, like dozens, only 2 have to be. So I just think I think my racial identity has really just I can't help but always be that person in the room that's saying like that is insufficient, and how can we make this better, and what if we made a tool that actually worked well on everyone, or how can we create policies that say that you have to at least test how well the tool works in different groups, which is kind of the baby step. So yeah, I think it kind of goes back to what I said earlier, where you have to do your job and the job of trying to counter, unfortunately, just a real like bias in how we even conduct research in this country.
Yeah, so I think that you just answered our next question, which
Oh.
looking back on your career, what are some difficulties you experience as a Black geneticist? I think doing the job of others is certainly a big one. And
Yeah.
also being the one in the room who has the voice and says, this is not sufficient would be another. But is there anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, and just it can be exhausting. I feel like every time I would be at a conference with a poster, people would, like, I would always get like at least someone coming by and saying like, oh, who did all your analysis for you, and like who wrote your code for you, and or that has also happened in trying to like get more like data skills outside of my PhD, in like joining clubs, and people saying like, oh well, this is going to be hard, you need to know how to code. And I just think that there's this assumption when people see you of what your capabilities will be, and there's just this like constant underestimation of who you are and what you can do, which is frustrating. But yeah, I think it's just been, at least for me, it was really inspiring when I came to my PhD. There was one other, actually, I think there was one other Black student, and I think he was just defending as I was getting there. And when I arrived, it was then me and one other student like came in at the same year. And then every year after us, more and more like Black students are coming in, and it was so like incredible to see that yeah, we were just helping to kind of create this space where more and more people felt comfortable to pursue their PhDs. And so I think that's also something really great that Black in Genetics does, where it helps people not feel so alone. So even if you are unfortunately the only like Black person at a conference, and you know someone's going to come say something to you stupid that they shouldn't, I love that I like got to find a community of other Black scientists and Black geneticists. So it kind of helps get you through yeah, those times when people make their assumptions about you when they see you. So
Yes, absolutely. That's actually a great segue to our next question, which is what are some ways that our community can support each other, even just within Black and genetics?
yeah, I think it's just I think just checking in often really helps. I have a few group chats with other like Black women in science, and it's a lot of times it's just like kind of what I was saying. It's like this is what someone said to me today. Can you believe it? But I think it's so nice to have that space to kind of just I don't know decompress and share and feel sane. And also just share good news, like oh, I got another like publication, or I got another talk accepted. So I think it's just like making community, checking in with one another, just making sure that you're not feeling alone, and that if you are, that you're reaching out. Because those same group chats are the ones that all of us were sending at some point. Like, I'm quitting this PhD, I can't do it, and the rest of us were like, no, it's okay, and talking us down. Because yeah, unfortunately, it's just the reality is you have more stacked against you as a Black person trying to pursue their PhD in this country. So community is the difference between surviving and not surviving with your sanity. So yeah, I think just kind of just be there for each other and encourage one another. And when you see opportunities, pass them along. It's how I've gotten all of my jobs since my PhD. Yeah, and I try to kind of do the same, and like try to mentor people that you see coming up. So as there were more and more like Black students coming in to my PhD program, I tried to like, be a mentor, just give advice and give like I provide like old essays for like applying to grants and stuff, so they can kind of model how to best get through. And yeah, I think just like help each other. Like there is enough space for all of us at the table, or we're making our own table, like whatever whichever way like you prefer to view it, but just definitely help each other up. Like there's no reason or space to be competing.
Yes, definitely. I like the analogy where you're like pulling up a chair for someone else, like we're
Oh,
just
I
making
love
more
that.
room at the table.
Yeah, there's enough room for all of us. Yeah.
Absolutely. So our closing question is one that, you can take in any direction you want. And just reflecting on like your entire time of like even knowing what genetics is, how do you think that our field has changed? Have you seen any betterment or things that are still lingering that need to be addressed?
Yeah, I think. I mean, I love that. I can't remember the acronym, but it's like the NIH's specific page about like genetics has been hilarious to follow over the last a couple of years. Where it's often memes. It's clearly like some millennial or Gen Z running the account,
Oh, there's
but
Twitter.
especially I know that they're on LinkedIn. I think they also have a Twitter. Yeah, but it's especially since the Black Lives Matter protests, it's been a lot more emphasis on we need to get more diverse reference genomes, and it's absurd that we like didn't have that to begin with. So I think become it's become almost like normal to say we are not doing a good enough job in the genetics field of bringing other people in.
Mhm.
And I've seen talks, which I especially love talks that bring in just the like that try to like merge cultural anthropology with genetics. Where I saw one about like specifically indigenous populations and how genetic material isn't it's just like it's not your own. It's also something that like maybe like the elders and like other people in your community should have a say in, because it's also their data. So I like that it's less of like people who are not part of your community coming in, sequencing your genome, saying, oh, here are the things that are different, this is why they're predisposed to this disease, taking that like fame and grant money and leaving, and more like how are we going to work within this community and respect them and respect their genetic privacy. So I feel like we still have a long way to go on that front, but I've been really encouraged that that has now kind of become the norm of let's involve some members of this group in what we're doing and make sure that they're okay with it. But I would say something that makes me nervous is it's been so cool to see how excited the non-geneticist like average person is to learn more about their genetic background and heritage through things like 23andMe and Ancestry.com. But I just think like I think we geneticists especially need to be maybe better about letting people know the risks that come with that. Like you are in finding out, exactly what percent. And also the percentages have huge error bars, so it's not even like it's exactly what percent. But to find out what percent of what ethnicity or what like little country in Europe your like ancestors are from is coming at the cost of like our broader genetic privacy. So I definitely, when people ask about doing those kinds of tests, just let them know like this private company will own a huge amount of data about you and will know a lot of information about all the generations before and or not all, but several before and after you. So just really think about if that is worth it. So I think that yeah, just in general, people are really more excited about learning about this stuff and like see it as valuable, which is really cool. But I think that yeah, I think that like it's it's a bit of a double-edged sword. So yeah.
Yeah,
um,
certainly.
yeah.
Well, those are our questions. Thank you so very much for joining us.
Thank
And
you.
you know, find us on Black in Genetics for Big League.